This lesson's entitled Joseph's Forgiving Others. Of course, we know Joseph's story. Forgiveness is not a normal attitude, but it comes from a relationship with God. It makes it a whole lot easier when you understand what God expects out of us as His children. This lesson reveals the forgiveness that Joseph had toward his brothers. Joseph understood that his God was in control of the circumstances of his life. Joseph didn't conduct himself the way that you would think a person normally would conduct themselves when they've been treated that way. But forgiveness is the basis of our relationship with God. When you think about it, God extends forgiveness to man that man does not deserve. I did not deserve to be forgiven. The thief on the cross did not deserve to be forgiven. None of us deserve forgiveness from God. Adam and Eve certainly did not deserve forgiveness, but God extended it to them anyway. And it just reveals the love that God has for His creation, more specifically for mankind. It's difficult for man to demonstrate that same type of forgiveness toward each other. It just is. Man wants forgiveness extended to himself, but the hard part is extending forgiveness to others. You know, we all want to be forgiven, but we're not real quick about forgiving others. Forgiveness is an intentional decision to let go of resentment and anger. Paul emphasized the necessity of forgiving one another over and over again. I'll just read a couple of verses in Ephesians 4:31. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from among you with all malice. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you. Has anybody ever done anything against us that's worse than what was done against Christ? No, absolutely not. But yet, what did Christ say hanging on the cross? Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. Yeah. The hardest thing to do is to forgive someone that doesn't show any remorse or change of heart that has wronged them, but there Christ was, looking down at those that were screaming, crucify him, looking at those soldiers that nailed him there. And what does he say? Father, forgive them. That shows us what kind of God we worship, how Jesus is. Joseph, let's get back to Joseph. Joseph was an exceptional individual. No one would have blamed Joseph if he had retaliated when those brothers showed up 22 years after they sold him into slavery. Yeah, he had an opportunity, didn't he? To do what the way God would want him to do it, or the way the old flesh would want him to do it. But we would not have any awesome example of what a proper attitude of forgiveness looks like, nor understand that our God is in control. I think Joseph understood, possibly he didn't know how it was going to work out, but those dreams that he had, he must have had some kind of belief and confidence that God was going to work it out, and that's going to happen one day. And it did happen one day. We don't know that for certain, but it might explain the faith that Joseph had in his God. Bottom line is, Joseph did not seek revenge when he had opportunity. Let's go ahead and read Romans 12:19 through 21. This is Paul writing to the Roman church. He said, Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, this is about God, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt reap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. But that's the introduction. Let's get to the first point. the wrong brothers, the wrong the brothers had done. Why would God forgive Joseph's brothers? Why would God not just start over? You remember Moses, on more than one occasion when he was leading Israel through the wilderness, he got so upset with them. They kept rebelling against God, and man, they were trying Moses' patience. And God would say, well, I'm going to kill them and start over, Moses. And Moses would plead with God, no, don't kill them. Don't start over. Then all the other nations is going to look down on you as their God. Now, God really wasn't going to do that, but that gives us a reflection of how good an individual, how forgiving a man Moses was, how patient he was with them hard heads that he was trying to help. Joseph's brothers, we know from the lessons we've already had, they were filled with hate and jealousy, and they planned to kill their own flesh and blood. That was what they wanted to do. That was their intent. They saw an opportunity to rid themselves of him and make a little money, though, so they sold him into slavery. The Quarterly writer said this: there was nothing redeeming about these brothers. And all I can say is, amen. That's a sad fact. Now, one of them didn't want to kill him. He wanted to rescue him. We know that. But this lesson allows us to see how God was in control the whole time. How he turns evil around. Those brothers intended evil. They exercised evil. But God turned it around to use it for his own will. We don't always know why God allows certain things to happen to us. Well, let me just give you an example. The evil men during Jesus' day, they crucified him thinking, well, we got rid of that imposter. But what they really do, they didn't realize that having crucified Jesus, they played right into the will of the Father. Accomplished his purpose for sending Jesus Christ. Even the apostles of Jesus did not understand the plan of God. We need to trust God when bad things happen and we don't understand it and we don't deserve it. But we don't know what that's going to produce in the future. It may produce great blessings for us in the future. It may produce, if we respond properly, blessings when we stand before him in judgment. Romans 8:28 kind of go good right here. And we know, do we really? And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. It did. We can look in hindsight and we can see how it worked out good. And to them who are called according to his purpose. Yeah. Joseph was called according to his purpose, wasn't he? With them dreams God gave him, we was telling him what's going to happen. Genesis 39:9, there is none greater in this house than I. And this is the words of Joseph. He said, there is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee. Now, this is Joseph when Potiphar's wife was, trying to entice him. He said, because thou art his wife. And listen to what he says. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against who? Potiphar? No, against God. Yeah. Joseph didn't blame God for his circumstances. He didn't blame God for that woman lying and getting him thrown. He didn't blame God for his brothers selling him. Joseph's actions were a reflection of his heart that worshiped and trusted in his God. He didn't understand how it was going to work out. Like I said, it was 22 years later when his brothers showed up. Matthew 12:35, before I get back to Joseph. A good man out of a good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things. An evil man out of an evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. So, just remember that. But let's go to point 2. The heart Joseph showed. We've already kind of been talking about it. When Joseph's brothers came down from Egypt, or down to Egypt, to buy food because of the drought that was going on over in the Promised Land, they never expected to be confronted about their deeds of the past. They had not forgot those deeds either, though. Numbers 32:23. But if we will not do so, behold, ye have sinned against the Lord, and your sin will find you out. Now, that verse of Scripture in Numbers, that was when the 12 tribes was getting ready to cross the Jordan River and to go in for the first time after Moses had died and possess that land. And you remember Reuben and Gad said, whoa, man, this is great for raising cattle and sheep over here. Can we stay on this side of the Jordan? That was a warning to them from God. If you don't go over and help your brothers, oh, it ain't going to be good for you. But they had no intentions of not going over. They were going to leave their families over there, go over, and stay as long as it takes and help them other 10 tribes run out the bad guys. But that was a warning to them. They wanted to stay on the east side of Jordan when the other tribes were going to go in and have to battle for that promised land. And they had an obligation to help them settle the promised land, to help them drive out those nations that occupied it at that time. If they refused to help, it would be a sin against God, and they would suffer the consequences. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately when they showed up into Egypt. They did not recognize him. Why? Because he didn't speak Hebrew. He was speaking Egyptian. And when those brothers showed up speaking Hebrew, the interpreter interpreted, even though he didn't need to interpret. Joseph heard their conversation. He knew exactly what them brothers were saying. Yes, he did. Genesis 42:8. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. Why? Well, dude, he was dressed to the T. He didn't look anything like that brother they sold 22 years before. No. At this moment, Joseph understood, I think, the dreams that revealed his brothers would have to bow down to him, come to him, with him being the authority figure. Here he was, the second in command of all of Egypt. He ran the whole show. And his brothers having to submit to him. Joseph put his brothers to a test, though, to learn if they had changed since the time when they had sold him into slavery. Go back to Genesis 42, verse 15. Hereby ye shall be proved. Joseph's like, yeah, I'm going to find out if these boys have changed any. By the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come hither. He said, you're going to have to bring your brother back. Because they had told him, yeah, we got a little brother, younger brother. He's back home with his daddy. Yeah, your daddy's still living? Yeah, he's still living. 22 years since Joseph was sold. Joseph accused them of being spies, and he cast them into prison for how long? 3 days. All of them. He put them in jail. Okay, maybe he didn't make it easy on them, but he wanted to see what he was dealing with. Then he said, one of you is going to have to stay here in prison. The rest of you can return home with the food, but you got to bring back your youngest brother in order to get your brother restored, and then y'all can buy more food. So the brothers went home to Jacob, but Jacob would not let them, he would not let them take Benjamin back to Egypt to buy more food. Well, guess what? When you run out of food, you got to do what you got to do. So Jacob finally agrees to allow Benjamin to go to Egypt. And Joseph wanted to see, when they got him over there, if the brothers cared about Simeon. That's the brother that they left in jail. Of course, we know he got treated well when he was over there. But the brothers didn't know that. And Simeon didn't know that's how he was going to be treated, because they put him in prison before them others left. But anyway, now Joseph's just going to see, well, are they coming back for their brother who they left in Egypt? Would they return with Benjamin and rescue their brother? Had they any regret about selling Joseph all those years ago? If sin does not bother you, you're not right with God. Genesis 42:22, and Reuben answered them, saying, spake I not unto you, saying, do not sin against the child, and he would not hear. That's what Reuben said back there before they sold him, He was going to rescue him. He said, I told y'all. 22 years later, and he said, I told y'all. Yeah. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood. They're sitting there arguing among themselves, and Joseph sitting there hearing everything they're saying. Because it says he spake unto them by an interpreter. They didn't know he understood Hebrew as well as they did. But at this point, Joseph's heart knew they had remorse for their sin against him all those years ago. Verse 24 and 25. And he turned himself about from them and wept. Joseph wept and returned to them again. He got out of there so they couldn't see him crying. He got his face all cleaned up and everything. And he came back in and he communed with them. And he took them to Simeon and bound him before their eyes. And Joseph commanded to fill their sacks. See, this is before they actually took him away. Before they went back home to daddy, and come back. So Joseph already knew, they know they did wrong. They know that. So Joseph commanded to fill the sacks with corn, to restore every man money in his sack, to give them provisions for the way, and that's what they did. But Joseph's heart was filled with forgiveness and compassion before he sent them away the first time. But he still was playing that testing them out. A family that did not love him previously. But when they eventually returned, and we already read those scriptures about Benjamin had coming back, and they finally run out of food, so they sent him back. And Joseph, so when they come back with Benjamin, guess what? He done figured out another test he's going to put them brothers through. When it was time for him to leave, he put his own silver cup, Joseph's own silver cup, in Benjamin's sack. And then he accused all the brothers of stealing it. Saying, no, let's find out who got it. And then they found it in Benjamin's sack. And that meant that Benjamin would have to stay in Egypt and become a slave. He could never go back home. Now, that's not what Joseph was going to do, but that's what he told the brothers was going to happen. And he wanted to see what their reaction was. And they started begging, and they would not leave without Benjamin. And Judah, another brother, he stepped forward and he reasoned and he begged and he offered to stay in Benjamin's place and become a slave. Let's read Genesis 44, 33 and 34. Now therefore I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord, and let the lad go with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father and the lad be not with me, lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come on my father? It was at this point that Joseph couldn't stand it anymore. He saw his brothers had changed, and he revealed himself before all them that stood by him. And he cried in their presence, and he says, cause every man to go out from me. In other words, all the Egyptians. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh, they heard it. And Joseph said to his brethren, I am Joseph. Does my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. The first time they heard, I'm Joseph, oh man, don't you know that mind was like, oh no, the wheels were turning. This ain't going to work out very good for us, is it? They couldn't even talk to him. And Joseph said to his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. And then he tried to reassure them. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. I bet that was music to their ears, wasn't it? He said, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in the which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. Back over there. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. He hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. 3 times Joseph tells his brothers who he is. 3 times Joseph tells his brothers that God sent him to Egypt. Hindsight's 20/20 when you walk with God, isn't it? Joseph was 100% willing to forgive his brothers. His brothers knew they did not deserve forgiving, and they were skeptical about whether or not he didn't plan on doing something to them later on. But God has forgiven all your sins for your whole life. Matthew 18:35, if you want to go over and look at that. Can't we forgive others their small sins against us? Nobody has sinned against us like mankind sinned against Jesus. Matthew 18:21 and 22. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I will forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus said, I say unto thee, until 7 times, or not unto thee 7 times, but until 70 times 7. The third point of this lesson is the continued provision by Joseph. There was 5 more years left in the drought. So Joseph promised to care for them, the whole nation, for this whole time. How far will God cast away our being guilty of sin? Psalmist says, as far as the east is from the west, so far hath he removed our transgressions from us. Those brothers knew they didn't deserve forgiveness. And when you got saved, you knew you didn't deserve to be forgiven. But you also knew what God said. In Jesus, I will forgive you. I sent him to make forgiveness for you possible. Isn't that awesome? I mean, Joseph, we could say he was a better man than most of us. Was he not? Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. But he knew. I don't know how he knew it. I don't know if he understood those interpretations of the dreams, but every step along the way, God blessed him, and he was patient, and he waited on God. And 22 years later, he knew the answer. 22 years later. Yeah, he tested his brothers, and he found out there was remorse. There was regret. They wished they hadn't done it. Why? Because they had watched their dad grieve and hurt for 22 years over his lost favorite son. They watched that. You don't think that wore on them? Yes, it did. All right, let's stand and we'll close it.